Hello and welcome to this Fully Charged Show podcast. Almost all of you will immediately have spotted that I'm neither Robert nor Johnny. The traces of a Manchester accent are a bit of a giveaway, but I promise I'm not here to talk about Frank Sidebottom or the proper way to eat a chip butty. Chip butty is a real thing for those of you from the south, look it up. Anyway, I'm Dr. Helen Czerski. I'm a physicist and future energy enthusiast, and I'm one of the presenters of Fully Charged. If you were lucky enough to attend Fully Charged Live 2019, you'll have seen me on stage hosting lots of panel discussions in the Mega Theatre on a huge range of topics relating to future energy and transport. But for those of you who weren't there or who just couldn't get around to see everything, and there was an awful lot to see, this podcast is here to help. What's coming up is a recording of one particularly fascinating discussion that we had on tyre pollution and particulates. It's something that I think we're all going to be hearing a lot more about in the future, and I was lucky enough to be joined by three fantastic panellists to discuss it. They were G. Erlandson from Enso Tyres, Chiara Dara from Eunomia, and Richard Lofthouse from Emissions Analytics. And here's what they had to say.
Thank you all for coming along. We are going to be talking about tyre pollution and particulates, and I have a real bee in my bonnet about this. So I'm really glad that you're all here, because I think it's something we don't talk about enough. And to help me discuss this topic, please welcome to the stage my three panellists, G. Erlandson, Chiara Dara, and Richard Lofthouse. Give them a welcome. Now, this is one of those things, right, where people think about one half of this problem, but they don't think about the others. So people, you know, all of us, I'm a cyclist, not really a driver very much, but I replace my bike tyres when the tread wears out, right? When people first learn to drive a car, they're taught to check the treads. No one ever asks where all that rubber has gone. And this is the other side of the problem. And if you talk to air pollution people, they will tell you that electric vehicles are not zero emission at all. They are zero tailpipe emission. And so we have to deal with what is coming from the tyres. So, and it's not, you know, like everything else, there are ways to solve the problem, but the first thing you have to do is acknowledge it. So to start us off, I'd like our three panellists to say a little bit, because we've got three different sets of experience here. So to get us started, please tell us a little bit about your views on this area and your experience, and just sort of a little short bit about your bit. Chiara, do you want to go first?
This is on. Hello, everybody. I'm an environmental consultant, and I work for a company that specializes in waste, recycling, and resources. And one of the topics we've been working on more and more in the past few years is plastics. Plastics in the circular economy, plastics recycling, marine plastics, single-use plastics, et cetera, and through that work, we have worked on microplastics and particulate pollution from tyres falls into this category. And we look at trying to estimate how much of this is getting in the environment, where it's going, what impacts it's having, and specifically what policy measures can be put in place to help bring this under control.
Okay, G, you are actually right in there with the tyres themselves. Tell us a little bit about that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gunnlaugur Erlendsson, and everyone calls me G because my first name is entirely unpronounceable. I am the founder of Enso. We are developing sustainable tires for electric vehicles. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to address in particular two things. The issue of range and improving the energy efficiency of electric vehicles by giving them a much better tires. But fundamentally what we want to do is make sure that the tire become far more durable to address the air quality and other pollution aspects of the tire industry. And this is something that the tire industry isn't addressing today. Very happy to sell you as many sets of tires as like razor blades, but fundamentally the technology is out there to make fundamentally better tires. And why we do this for electric vehicles is, of course, they have heavier weights and higher torques. So they wear out tires quicker. So it's important for this discussion to understand that an electric vehicle will wear out tires faster and therefore generate more particulate matter than a standard vehicle. And this is why we think electric vehicles should come first in addressing this problem.
So we're talking about particulates as though everyone knew what they were and where they go. They generally sound bad. That's people's normal response to them. But perhaps, Richard, you can introduce that topic a little bit and explain how your role in it.
So, hello everyone. I work for a company called Emissions Analytics, which was founded by Nick Molden, and we've developed an expertise in real-world emissions testing, mostly so far for exhausts from ordinary internal combustion engine vehicles. But we're turning to tyres, and we're actually working with G on this at the moment. We're developing a real-world test. A tyre during its life will shed about 10% of its mass, of its weight. And of course, part of the problem visualizing this is that you don't see it. When a car passes you in the street, you never think of it, of the tyres actually disappearing. But when you reckon on a tyre being, say, 10 kilograms, and the fact that a kilogram of that weight will disappear over 20,000 miles, you think of a kilogram of tyre, where does it go? It's in the atmosphere one way or another. And then the question is, what we're trying to do is to capture an accurate sample in the real world on real roads of what that loss of the tyre amounts to. And I mean, what we're going to find, I think, it's a mixture of ragged particles that fall quickly to the ground. It's a mixture of finer particles right down to a very fine, ultra-fine level. And then in certain conditions and in certain temperatures, it emits as a sort of aerosol, as a sort of ultra-fine, invisible levels of aromatic compounds that go out into the air and actually affect air quality.
So let's just start right back at the beginning. One of the things that we take for granted is that tyres are black. If you look back at very early vehicles, you will see they had white tyres because rubber is white. So, Enzo, maybe you're the person, G, sorry, long day. G, tell us a little bit about what tyres are made from. Why are they black to start with? And then what else goes into a tyre? Why do you make a tyre out of some things and not out of other things?
Great question. So, historically, tires were white because they were made out of natural rubber and zinc oxide. Zinc oxide is pretty terrible to the planet, but it was also not as durable as another carcinogen called carbon black. So, suddenly tires became black because someone said, let's put some carbon black in them. Great, they made them more durable. This was in the 20s and 30s. Then someone came out and said, let's make them out of radial technology. Then came silica technology. Each one, of course, expanded the performance triangle. But fundamentally, most passenger car tires today are made out of synthetic rubber from fossil fuels and carbon black from fossil fuels. This means that your electric vehicles are currently driving on fossil fuels. No question.
We can all boo now, right?
So I love the idea everyone is so keen on electric vehicles, but I want to solve the last fossil fuel problem of the electric vehicle, which is the tire. Now, currently there's better technology out there using advanced natural rubbers, using filler materials from plant-based or waste product like from lignin or cellulose, graphene and certain nanochemistry and nanoparticles. All of that exists. What isn't in the picture is that the tire industry makes a lot of money. It makes more money overall than the vehicle industry. It's a hidden industry, and it constantly is growing as we are moving around more and more. And the point here to remember is that they're very happy to sell the same kind of products to electric vehicles because you wear them out faster than a typical car owner. So why should they change?
So let's just talk about when these particulates are emitted. Richard, perhaps you've got something to say about this. So how does this depend on, are they emitted more in the cities or on big roads? Does it depend on people's driving style? Is it the same for everyone? How much variation is there?
I think the broad point that I would want to make about this is that high-performance cars that are bought for their performance if you're going to buy that car, the manufacturer of that car is assuming that you're going to accept a higher tyre bill because it will work its way through tyres, and it's set up to sacrifice the life of the tyre for the performance that you're paying a premium for. So, a Tesla, a performance level Tesla, it has aggressive toe and camber settings and alignment on its tyres to maximise performance. It also has, of course, sophisticated traction control, just like its internal combustion engined high performance cousins, to allow you to accelerate as quickly as possible. But all of this is ultimately still at the expense of the tyres. So I was actually on a bicycle in London when the Model S first came out, and I remember I was behind a delivery driver who was enjoying it, and he was putting his foot down at every single traffic light, and the electronics are absolutely fantastic. There was no wheel spin at all, but if you were right behind him on a bicycle, you could hear the tyres were at the point of spinning. They have to be, because if the slip is not detected, the traction control doesn't aggressively cut in. So that is called tyre scrub, and tyre scrub is a form of tyre wear, and if you drove around like that all day long, you would get through your tyres really, really quickly. So, and of course, electric cars have all the torque up front, which is why they're a lot of fun, but they're also heavier, so that if you put all that together, by some estimates, electric cars are going to burn through tyres up to 30% more quickly than an internal combustion engine car. I think the biggest point, though, is how do you drive it? And if you're gentle, you'll get a nice long life out of your tyres.
And just something to add, so some of you may have seen me walking around today with an infrared camera that Fleur have lent us, and looking at where the heat is coming off electric vehicles. And actually we did a comparison with a piston engine yesterday. Piston engine car is glowing like a light bulb. The electric cars, the only thing that is warm is the tyres. And you can see how, and I was just down in the garage downstairs, I think one of the Jaguars, they just replaced one of the tyres actually. They'd taken the old tyre off, they put it in the boot. It had been sitting there for 20 minutes, and it was still hotter than anything else on the car and the charger. And that energy, that heat energy, came from friction. So there's a lot of friction out there. So, Chiara, what are people's responses to this? I mean, you're talking about pollution in a more general sense. Do you get surprised? Do people believe you if you talk about tyre pollution? What kind of response do you get?
I think people do accept that it's an issue because it's quite easy to observe that tyres wear down. Richard's example was very clear. That stuff is going into the environment. And one of the problems is it doesn't seem a very easy problem to tackle. So people immediately kind of go, like, another problem is synthetic fibers from clothes being washed down the drain, and this is also a big source of microplastics. And it does tend to produce some resistance because people think, it's everywhere, they're tiny pieces, they're microscopic, we're never going to get them back out again. Let's just maybe tackle something that's easier. But people do accept that it's a problem. And I wanted to put a little bit of scale on it because you might be thinking, but how big a problem in terms of plastics emissions is it compared to other things? And so we did an analysis for the UK that actually suggests that microplastic pollution, compared to other more well-recognized sources of plastic pollution like plastic packaging and littering, the amount of plastics deriving from direct microplastic deposition could be as much as that coming from macroplastics, so your general everyday litter. So you're looking at about 50% coming from microplastics, which are things like tire dust and clothes and pellets, pre-manufacturing plastic pellets, and then 50% from everyday litter. And tire microplastics could be the biggest source of microplastics, so about 2/3. So I think it's an important issue if you are concerned about plastics getting into the environment.
I'll add to that. The IUCN published a report which scared the shit out of the tire industry last year. So the tire industry decided to ignore it completely, and you won't find a single mention on any of the big tire companies about it. But the IUCN said that at least 28% of all primary microplastics floating into our oceans is now tire dust. And put that in perspective, the largest contributor from Europe and the United States is tire dust. In Asia, the largest contributor is actually synthetic fibers from all the clothes they make there, but it's only just above the amount of tire dust. So you got a lot of stuff. And another thing that is important to note when you talk about tire dust, yes, we have ultrafine particles and stuff that basically affects air quality. It affects when you walk down the street. It affects kids as they walk into school. But the other part of it, the larger particles, they get washed down the drain and into our oceans because we have very efficient systems to get rid of stuff off the road. So we built those systems. They are basically like jet engines to deliver tire dust into our oceans. So it's a big, big problem. Another thing that I want to give as well in terms of scale, because we talked about tailpipe and non-tailpipe. Now, under Euro 6 regulations, you're allowed to put in the total mass of PM emissions, 0.5 grams per kilometer. Tire dust is on average 6 times more, about 3 grams per 100 kilometers. So you got a problem right now that is about 6 times bigger than the total stuff in terms of PM that's coming out of the tailpipe under the regulations, but is not being addressed. When you buy a tire that only has half the life of a better tire, for example, a higher grade tire, you are actually doubling the amount of emissions you're putting into the environment by buying cheaper, inferior tires. But fundamentally, when you got the entire industry all doing the same thing, all using the same kind of raw materials, same manufacturing processes, same distribution channels that all rely on selling you more of this stuff, it's not going to change until you really break that model.
So let's just turn to, now we've had the doom and gloom bits. Technology's got it into this mess. Maybe technology can get us out of it. So in terms of the tire technology, can you make a tire that is close to zero emission? What material, like how far off is this? What can you do? How quickly could you scale it up? And is there anything that people can buy now that solves this problem?
Yes, people can choose today to buy high-grade tires from the known producers, specifically the ones that at least give you some warranty on the durability. So look at the warranty in particular. Does it say 40,000 miles? Does it say 50,000 miles? Buy that one. Pay more for the tire because overall you'll pay less than changing them overall all the time. In terms of the technology, there is existing technology already out there in terms of the processing of the raw materials and the selection of raw materials, switching away from fossil fuel-based materials into higher grade materials. The problem is very simple, however. The tire industry makes a certain amount of money selling the tire into the distribution system. And that has to be profitable because they don't own always the distribution system. But those margins are being squeezed. So even if they make a tire that lasts a lot longer, because the distribution system is built for obsolescence, about selling tires as many times as possible, the distribution system is not incentivized to sell a tire that has 100,000 miles or 200,000 miles in durability because they'd only sell you one instead of selling you 4 sets or even more. So why would they? So the system itself is broken. What we're doing at Enzo, we are developing tires for electric vehicles targeting range to begin with and second, durability to improve the life of the tire. But fundamentally, it has to be a win-win situation. That's why we are looking to provide our tires as a service. So you pay per mile. And if I can make a tire that lasts forever, I'll keep minting money off that tire while it's still on your vehicle. And you'll never have to change it. And that's a win for you, and it's a win for me, and it's a win for the environment. So that is the fundamental building block that we're basing Enzo. Because we have to look at tires in a holistic and a circular way, looking at the emissions as well as how it's produced.
So on that, so say we introduce new tires, and then there's driving style and the way your car works also matters. So you can imagine maybe new regulations or new guidelines. How easy is it, Richard, to monitor that? It's fine for someone to say you have to create a tire or drive in a way that only produces this many particles. But how easy is it to check? Can we follow this up and actually point fingers at the people who are behaving badly?
I think driver behaviour is obviously subject typically to all the regulations we already have around speed limits and so on. We're talking about the City of London Corporation are going to impose a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, and I mean, at that level, yeah, there are limits for ludicrous mode in your Tesla.
Yes, the idea there is a ludicrous mode is another thing, isn't it? But do you think, is this something that you could monitor at the tyre itself, or does it have to be on a city-wide level?
There's actually quite a lot of research going on in the moment about, including what we're doing, about how you capture a real-time, real-world sample from a tyre as it's being driven, so we know exactly what's being emitted and how. It's quite I guess, if you read all the academic papers that have been published on this, it is extremely complex. But it is possible to capture a signal in real time. And I think the sort of regulatory world that will encompass the sort of innovations that G is working on will start to provide clarity to consumers about what is clean and what is not clean, just as with any other consumer product. And I think that's coming with tyres. And the disruption that we're getting from electric vehicles is precisely the moment in time which is providing a kind of adjacent disruption around tyres. And I think it's going to happen all together with innovators and disruptors like G.
So just before we go to audience questions, there's so much to dig into with this, but I just wanted to ask you, all three of you, about one other thing, which is that tyre recycling, whether or not, however long your tyre lasts, at some point, presumably, it's not doing the job of a tyre anymore. Now, I've been in lots of places, and I'm sure you all have too, where you see retreads in America, sort of leftover tyres sitting by the side of the road, you see stacks of them. They actually directly cause things like dengue fever in places in South and Central America because the water accumulates on the inside of a tyre and the mosquitoes breed there. Generally, there's a problem. So tyre recycling, how does that link into this? Because if you're going to fix a tyre, can you also fix the other end of the problem?
I'm going to mention something that I don't know whether that you guys are aware of at all, but a lot of tyres, when they come to the end of their lives, they get ground up into tiny little pellets or flakes, and they get put on AstroTurf pitches. They get used in playground surfaces, and they also get used in equestrian raceways and trackways to help sort of maintain a certain quality of the ground for play and for horses and for football. But there's absolutely no regulation of this. There's no standards to stop that then from gradually leaking into the environment. So if you go to a pitch, an AstroTurf pitch, you'll see these plastic or synthetic rubber, particles. They're in the changing rooms. They're washing down drains. Sometimes these areas are close to rivers. It's absolutely uncontrolled release into the environment. So even at the end of life, when recycling is being attempted, it can be a further source of microplastics. So yeah.
Go on,
I completely agree. I know we're short on time, and of course we have scare stories. The fact that there have been over 100 cases of female goalkeepers getting leukemia, as shown by Yale University, having played on AstroTurf embedded with ground-up rubber from tires, is an evidence of the toxicity of the materials currently used in the tire industry. Some of the stuff is toxic, and by grinding it up and have kids play on it, you're actually delivering basically those toxins into your children at some of the most vulnerable periods of their lives. So I'm dead against putting basically toxic tire dust into AstroTurf and similar venues. It's really danger, and across Scandinavia and Holland, they're ripping those out already and banning kids from playing on them. The problem, however, is bigger than that. Every single ton of waste tires that basically gets recycled for energy, as they call it, basically gets burnt. Now, the calorific value of a tire is really, really high, so if you burn it, you get a lot of power, but about 2/3 of the total weight, about 650 kilos for every ton, becomes pure CO2. Congratulations. So that itself is called recycling. Except also it's delivering all the heavy metals and all the dioxins at the same time to the areas around those power plants. So congratulations. That is what the tire industry is willing and is doing today. And there are options to fix it. There are technologies out there to disassemble the tire, to devulcanize the tire. There are, of course, retreads are commonly used, for example, in the truck tire industry, where tires as a service is a model that businesses have adopted. What we're going to see is that going to be switching over specifically to large electric vehicle fleets, because once autonomous vehicles are driving around, they're not going to be driving very fast. They're going to be driving in geofenced areas under very specific conditions. And within those conditions, you can actually apply recycling technologies like retreading. But fundamentally, we can break the tire down into a powder using existing technology and re-enter the powder back into the tire. The problem is this: the entire industry doesn't want to get its tires back because, God, they have no idea what they're going to do with them. The problem is we have to think circular. We have to think holistic, and we have to change this industry completely.
Okay, Richard, have you got anything to contribute on recycling?
A lot of tyres get crated off to somewhere like India and then sometimes burned in the cement industry. I mean, I think I would just emphasise what G said there about the nasty stuff that you get when you burn a tyre. It's not nice. It's a heavy source of pollution at a local level. We're basically, if you export tyres that get burned in an emerging economy, you've exported a dreadful form of air quality as well that is blighting the lives of ordinary people.
Okay, so this is all very serious. I'm sure the audience has lots of questions. If you do have a question, stick your hand up. We've got a microphone. Please, short questions, not comments.
Yeah, hi. I have a question. What do you think is the futures in tires? Is it going to be like circle economy, or is it biodegradable stuff?
Future tyres.
Circular, because here's the problem with biodegradability. And this is something we're looking at because we're looking at all kinds of technologies, self-healing technologies, multi-matrix technologies, and different things. But fundamentally, we put bio stuff into the tire, which we hope that biodegrades. But if the tire starts to biodegrade while it's on the car, that's not good. So adopting a robust system where it's more circular focused, but that is important. But what we want to do is also engineer in the biodegradability of the particle. So even though we can move the amount of particles wearing from the tires by half or lower, there's still going to be some particles that are going to be generated, even if you just drive on really rough roads. You can't avoid something being generated. But we want to make sure it's less toxic or entirely non-toxic. It has to be non-carcinogenic, and ultimately it should be biodegradable. But we discuss whether the biodegradability should happen over the course of a year or over 5 years. That's where we need to engineer the gap. But once it becomes a particle, it has to be inert to the environment.
And I would add that if you speak to any plastics area, people who study plastics waste on biodegradability, they are generally of the opinion that nothing almost that says it's biodegradable as a plastic genuinely is in practice in the environment. There's a lot of things to do with industrial composting is a different process. Anyway, separate issue.
Hi there, thanks very much. It's been fascinating. What I'm interested in is where all the particles end up. Are they all ultimately ending up in the sea or in the air? How long do they last there, and what are the impacts on both humans and on the natural environment as well of those particles?
So this is an area of very active research at the moment, and the answer is we don't know the answer to all of those questions at the moment. But in terms of tire particles in particular, the majority initially are probably going to soil potentially, and then you've got stuff going down stormwater drains, some entering the sewage treatment, so wastewater treatment system, and you've also got stuff going into the air. And I think in order of magnitude, probably sewage, stormwater drains are the biggest, then sewage system, then air deposition, and it's soil as a bit of a question mark in how much is getting sort of washed directly on the sides of roads. And once it's in waterways, its potential pathway to rivers and the sea is much faster than if it was in soil, and also in air. Then it's going to travel really fast, really far, and go back down in precipitation and just general air deposition, it's called. Even once something is in the waterways, a lot of this kind of material sinks and it becomes part of sediment. There's the sediment cycle that it's going to become part of. And I don't know many facts and figures about the sediment cycle, but I understood that once something is in a riverbed, it might take 50 years for it to sort of get out to sea. But it's going to be a big distribution of time before these particles getting out there. And of all plastics, probably the vast majority are eventually working their way to the seafloor. So you might have heard the statistic that about 1% of plastic pieces are floating around on the surface, about 5% on beaches, and so 5% on the seafloor. And that's probably mirrored by tiny plastic particles too, but there is a lot of uncertainty about it because we're even lacking the methods to measure microplastics all the way down to nano scale in the environment. Those techniques actually don't exist, especially at the nano end. So there's a lot of things we don't really know. In terms of the impacts on humans and animals, there are demonstrated impacts of microplastic ingestion on marine creatures. So they have been shown to affect growth, mortality, feeding, reproduction, and all the way down to subcellular level. However, mostly at quite high concentrations. And so those concentrations don't exist or exist very rarely in the real world environment at the moment. But if plastic emission is uncontrolled, you could be seeing areas of the environment that have those concentrations more widespread in more places over the next 100, 200 years, because we cannot remove these tiny pieces of plastic from the environment. And even though the impacts are a little bit uncertain at present environmental concentrations in the real world, because it's an irreversible change to the environment that's happening, we have to act a bit preemptively on a precautionary principle.
And of course, it's hard not to be aware that we are sitting right in the middle of a gigantic racetrack with some of the fastest cars in the country burning a lot of rubber just around us. So enjoy your fresh air today out in the paddock. So maybe I think we probably allow a couple more questions because there were so many hands up.
Thank you for a great talk. I was interested in the difference in particulate matter emissions per kilometre between the tyre and the tailpipe you mentioned. Is there anything coming in law or policy to limit that in the future?
Not that I've seen. The situation is, it's funny actually. I caveat that with one note. In the United States, when people buy tires, they actually care a lot more about durability because they only drive at 55 miles an hour and maybe 65 miles an hour. And it's all straight roads and no turns. So basically, the American way of buying tires is all about durability. How many miles do I have as a warranty? And then they go really angry to the tire reseller and say, didn't get what I was promised. That's a good thing. Now, the European Union has not put a mileage criteria. Also, the tire industry can't even agree on how to measure a durability of a tire. Strange, but there's no common standard to say, this is how you test it. What we're doing with emissions analytics, because we just got a UK government grant to look at tire emissions, try to solve them and try to measure them, is to alert people to the fact that there is such a thing as tire emissions and it's bigger than tailpipe in total volume. But the regulation has a lot more miles to go before it actually becomes aware enough. But it's in the human psyche and in government. But it's interesting that the first meeting I had with DEFRA on tire emissions was a couple of years ago, and I only had one guy in the room out of 12 who knew anything about it. But now they're all on top of it. And it's also interesting that if you read the London Mayor's environmental strategy, in a footnote, you will find a reference that says by 2030, 90% of all PM emissions in London are going to be tire and brake wear. But it doesn't say that brake wear is dropping like a rock because of regen braking systems. So where's that 90% of all PM emissions in London going to come from? And so this is a big challenge. And in terms of the point she was making earlier, I want to add that you're absolutely right. Some of those studies on animals, like little sea creatures, and they feed them tire dust and see how they do, and they feed them ocean plastics and they feed them shower gel beads. A friend of mine just finished one of those studies And his conclusion, he's never seen anything die as quickly as stuff that ingests tire dust versus other ocean plastics.
On the regulation level, so the EU is currently revising the EU tyre label, which rates tyres according to sort of A to G. Yeah, so at the moment it doesn't have durability, so tyre abrasion, but they are proposing to mandate the development of a standard to measure tyre abrasion where none currently exists, which is essential for comparing different tyres in that respect. So they're going to mandate that, and when it has been developed, it must then be included in the tyre label. And it'll probably be rated on an A to G scale or something. And that's a current proposal that's being debated right now, so we hope it gets through.
Okay, has anyone got one last question that isn't incredibly difficult and complicated?
Helen, will you be telling Johnny to stop doing donuts?
So for those of you who missed this downstairs, even yesterday on his little Moto Chimp thing, we took out the thermal camera. First thing he did was come to a stop very quickly and then spin the back tyre, and you could see the heat on the ground and you could smell it. So I haven't told him yet, but I might subtly drop a hint to him today that this might be a good idea. And it is one of those things, it's one of those interesting things, and because people come to cars with different motivations. I'm not a car person. I wasn't impressed by any car ever until I drove a Tesla, frankly. And then I went, okay, that I can be impressed with that if I have to. I'm a cyclist. But so I don't like noise and intrusive things. But some people really like the tire burn thing, and that's a culturally learned thing. There's all these American films with people zooming around, screeching around corners, and that is part of our culture. And so that means that getting rid of that actually means shifting culture, not just changing the tire and changing the way someone drives. It's a very deep and interesting thing. Anyway, we've gone on for far too long. Please, it's so much to say. Hopefully we'll get to say more on Fully Charged soon. Please join me in thanking our fabulous panelists, G and Chiara and Richard.
The discussion here could have gone on for hours. There was so much to say. Whenever I talk to air pollution experts, they tell me that they're convinced that this topic is going to hit the headlines in a big way soon, and it's a case of when, not if. And we'll be following along with all the progress in understanding it and the potential solutions here at Fully Charged. We do hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. Feel free to share your feedback with us by emailing it to podcast@fullychargedshow.co.uk. And do subscribe to the podcast feed and the YouTube channel. You can find those links at www.fullycharged.show. Lastly, thank you so much to all our Patreon supporters. Without your help, we couldn't make this show or the podcast or do our live events. So thank you very, very much. We really do appreciate it. You'll be seeing me again very soon. And if you have been, thank you for listening.